Hello. Hello everyone. Welcome to this online lecture talking about teamwork. Can you see my image behind the background image behind me? So we are going to talk about teamwork. Yay! Fantastic. And we are going to have two lovely guests joining us. Yay! Okay, so I will hand over to Rainy and Oliver. Okay, to you.
All right, thank you very much. So I'll click on scene. Can they see my screen yet?
No, you need to shoot.
So swipe to the PowerPoint.
Yep.
Yeah, here's it.
Can you guys see my screen? Oh, there is a delay. Oh wow, that's a big delay.
Yeah, we can see you now. Yeah, you are here already.
Yeah, but the screen
It's
is
okay,
not
it's
sharing.
okay.
Oh, there it
It's
is.
just delay.
Okay, there we go. All right, hello everyone, and welcome to How to Survive a University Group Project. So both of us are, university students. I've recently graduated, so we know what it's like to go through the torture of being in a group project. So a lot of the tips that we're trying to give you today are tips that you can use in this course, COMP1531, and hopefully throughout the rest of your degree. First of all, a little bit about myself. My name is Oliver. I recently graduated with a bachelor's in mechanical engineering, and over the last couple of months I've been working quite closely with Yuchao, teaching DESN 1000. And while I was teaching that course, I noticed that a really common problem is, I think because there's a lot of first years in the course and earlier year students, they really struggle with the group work side of things. And I remember I shared a couple of tips in class one time, and they said it was one of the most valuable things they've gotten so far. So what I want to do with you guys today is share as many of those tips as possible, and hopefully it will help you out. Now, I took 13 group-based courses as part of my degree and did very well with a lot of them. I taught 7 group-based courses, and I was the department lead at SunSwift Racing for 2 years. So I've pretty much seen and made all of the mistakes you can see and make in a group project. Okay, I'm here to give you the general teamwork principles, and then Rainy, who's with me now, one of your course tutors, will teach you how it can apply to this course specifically.
Awesome. Thanks, Oliver, for that quick intro. So I'm Rainy. It's nice to meet you guys. You might have seen me lurking around lectures a bit, but it's good to formally meet you guys as well. Here's a little bit about me. I'm a really experienced COMP1531 tutor. Been here for 3 years, veritable grandma at this point. I've interned at a range of companies. I've been involved in a lot of student-led group-based activities, and I'm an experienced slacker and high-performing leader. Also, I unironically love group work. Yes, my friends have called me insane for having this opinion. So, let's talk a bit about why teamwork in the first place. If I had seen this lecture content topic pop up, I'd be like, yo, I got teamwork in the bag. I know how to do group work. I don't need to watch this lecture, right? However, the reality is that teamwork is one of the most important skills that you guys can learn, and it's often kind of like neglected in terms of actually teaching it in uni, right? So I think it's very worthwhile for us to formally present some ideas about how to think about teamwork to shape how you guys work in teams going forward. Next, a common complaint I hear from COMP1531 students is, COMP1531 is all about the group. You get a good group, you're golden. You get a bad group, you're so stuffed, bro. But, I don't think this is true. Like, what I've seen is that when there's like a very good group member, they find that they can have a pretty consistent group work experience no matter the team. Obviously, this isn't including like edge cases. If someone's like trying to actively sabotage your group for some reason, yeah, okay, this stuff probably isn't going to work so well, right? But otherwise, learning how to be a good group member sort of reduces the random chance you get with teams. So I hope we can help you with that. Finally, a side note that I find really interesting is that there's been some pretty famous reports that having diverse teams lead to better solutions. If you're a bit interested in this, have a look up about it. I think there's a Harvard Business Review, really famous one, that talks a little bit about it. All right, I will now hand back to Oliver to talk a little bit about goals.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm just going to introduce myself briefly again because I know a couple of people have joined a little bit late. My name is Oliver. I studied mechanical engineering. I recently graduated, and today I'll be talking about some of the general teamwork principles that you can apply to a group project. And with me, she just introduced herself, is Rani, and she's talking about how you can apply these principles to COMP1531 specifically. Okay. Our goal today is to try and give advice to our younger self. If I was to do a first year group project again, what would I do differently? Because I made so many mistakes, right? So we want you to learn from our mistakes so that you don't have to do things the hard way. We want to give you strategies that you'll actually want to use, right? Your child could have just invited some project manager from industry to come along and share all the complicated tools that they use. But we wanted to teach you things that you can actually use in an academic context. And then at the end, we're going to teach you how to apply these strategies to COMP1531 specifically. Okay, now disclaimer, these strategies are not compulsory, right? These are just recommendations. You may find some of these strategies useful in future courses and in your future career, but don't feel any pressure that you have to use them in COMP1531. If there is something that we do require you to use because it's accessible, we'll let you know. Okay, what are we covering today? Number one is how to make sure that people get things done on time. And of course, how to make sure that those tasks are done to a high standard. Now, for those of you who think you'll be struggling to make a good contribution, we'll be teaching you how to be a better contributor, how to distribute tasks fairly, prevent arguments, make decisions as a group, how to run meetings that aren't a complete waste of time. So yeah, let's start with the first one. How to make sure that people get their work done on time. Now, the message that you see on screen, I've changed the name, I've changed the example, but it was a scenario from my first year. Hey Sam, considering that you have experience with 3D modeling, do you mind making a model of the enclosure? And then Sam said yes, and the next meeting rolls around, and Sam didn't get it done. And it's because of a mistake that I made in giving out this instruction. Does anyone want to guess what that mistake was? So slow. Should I continue?
Someone saying assert a deadline.
Oh, good, Adam, excellent. The first answer was correct. Assert a deadline, yeah? People will use any excuse they can to not get something done on time. So you have to make sure that you're always setting deadlines, because if you don't, they will exploit that excuse. Next is to avoid the social diffusion effect. I'm not going to explain what that is yet, but read the message on screen and see if you can guess what I did wrong. Mary and Jason, can you write up the justification for the design decisions section of the final report? Now, Mary and Jason both liked that comment, but it didn't get done. And we did set a deadline this time, so what did we not do correctly?
Didn't check with them. What was it? I don't know.
Yes, two people rely on each other. You are on a roll. So, Mary will say, oh, I thought it was Jason's job to get it done. And Jason will say, oh, I thought it's Mary's job to get it done. When you give one task to two people, you will often find that it doesn't get done. So always try and be as granular as possible. Split up your tasks person by person. Now, it doesn't mean that two people can't collaborate on something, but you just have to be specific about who is doing what and document that, or they will exploit that as an excuse. Okay, next is to exploit commitment bias. Now, commitment bias is this psychological trick that you can use to make people more likely to get something done. People are more likely to get something done if they have said in the past that they will get it done. Okay, so I use this with my private tutoring students a lot. I tutor a couple of year 6, year 7 students, and I often find that I come around and see them the next week and they don't get their homework done. And they come up with excuses like, oh, I didn't know you gave me this homework, or I didn't know I was supposed to do that, or oh, I forgot that you told me to do that. And it's the same excuses every time. So to eliminate that excuse, I make them write their own homework now, in their own handwriting, sign their own name, and put the homework in the same place every time. So they can't use that excuse of, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to do that. Now, I'm not expecting you guys to write down and sign your names next to everything that you need to do, but at least have some kind of verbal agreement in place where everyone says that they're going to do something, and it just makes them that much more likely that they will do it. Next is to exploit the social facilitation effect, which is when you're doing work and you are in the presence of other people who are either also doing work or supervising you doing that work, you can focus, typically, so much more better. Which is why back in year 12, I was at the State Library all the time, because it's the perfect environment to get work done, because everyone there is so focused. Next, of course, you have to regularly check in and send reminders to people. Whether those reminders are sent during daily meetings, or even just through a simple Microsoft Teams post, which can look like this. Just a reminder that our report is due this Friday at 5 p.m. According to our timeline, today is supposed to be the last day to do blah blah blah. Please comment below if you do not think you can get your written sections done by tomorrow at the latest. So you have to try and encourage this transparency. Now, Holly here, being the great group member that she was transparent, and she did let the team know, sorry, I've been more focused on the video, but blah, blah, blah. Okay, next rule, and probably the most overlooked one, is that a team will not lead itself. Now, I remember being back in first year, me and the rest of my teams didn't want to elect a team leader because we thought we were going to have to bow down to some kind of dictator, and this dictator would make up all the rules and tell us how things should be designed, and the rest of the team wouldn't have any freedom. This is not necessarily the case. Now, the role of a team leader is to, number 1, set goals. Actually, you guys help me out. Tell me some of the things that a team leader needs to do.
What about setting deadlines?
Setting deadlines, yeah, for sure.
Or distributing tasks?
Distributing tasks, yeah.
Chasing everyone for
Yeah,
work.
chasing everyone up, reminding them.
Yeah.
Any suggestions from the chat?
What about teamwork well-being?
Yeah, monitoring well-being, good.
Mm-hmm.
Yuchao's got all the answers.
How do you monitor the well-being?
Yeah, good question. How do you monitor people's well-being? What I would suggest is that if you suspect someone is not doing too well, if they've not been rocking up to meetings regularly, if they're not their usual self, if they're not as sociable, again, have a private, candid conversation with them and just see how they're going. See if they need to get anything off their chest, see if they need any help. Okay. No suggestions from the chat, so I will reveal all the answers. Okay, so the roles of a team leader are to delegate tasks, correct, Yuchao. To plan a timeline, correct, Yuchao.
Yay.
To facilitate communication, which means just to make sure that people are talking to each other and talking to each other in a fair way. Motivating and supporting the team, monitoring progress, and mediating conflict. Okay, now, you notice that in those roles, none of them mentioned that a team leader has to have the best technical skills or be a dictator, have a higher workload than anyone else, start fights with people. You don't have to be the most experienced or authoritative member. I'll tell you a story. Back in my undergraduate thesis, we had one person in our group who admitted she was not the best engineer. She didn't do that well in her engineering courses, but she still wanted to make a strong contribution to the team. Now, because she was organized, she was a good communicator, she was quite assertive, she wanted to be the group leader. Now, she turned out to be amazing, and she didn't even have much technical skills. So it just goes to show you don't need to be the best in the team to be the leader. You just need to be a good communicator, you need to be empathetic, you need to be organized, you need to be assertive. That's about it. Okay, now I'm going to move on to Gantt charts because I've actually noticed in the past that especially a lot of the first year students haven't even heard of what a Gantt chart is. A Gantt chart is a tool that we use to visualize task scheduling, communicate dependencies between tasks, which is when one task can't be started until the previous task has been finished, allow for progress tracking, so just to make sure that you are getting things done according to the time that you expected to get them done. But keep in mind that Gantt charts are not really necessary for this course. Now, we're teaching it today because you might find it useful in future courses, as well as outside of your degree, but don't feel pressured to use a Gantt chart in this course. A Gantt chart basically looks like this. Along the left side, you will have a list of all of your tasks, and along the top, you will have when they need to be done. Now, these blue bars represent when you plan to get something done, and the orange represents when you actually got something done. And the reason why we mark out when we planned and when we actually got something done is so that after we submitted an assessment, we can have a meeting as the team and just try and discuss what went wrong. Why did things get submitted so late? And how can we account for that potential lateness in the future? And you have to make sure that as you're setting tasks, you set up internal deadlines, meaning you're not just going to slap all of your work together onto the same document the day before it's due and submit. We want to leave a good amount of time beforehand just to account for things going wrong. All right, now, this is probably one of the things that's really going to make a difference for your marks. How to make sure work is done to a high standard. Please, read the marking criteria, right? As tutors, all too often, we're marking people's work and we can tell that they haven't spent even a minute reading the marking criteria. And sometimes students will complain that the marking criteria is too vague. Now, you're in university now, you're not in high school. We can't spoon feed you with the most detailed marking criteria. So if you find that the marking criteria is too vague, add that specificity yourself. Next is to have a rigorous review process. Back in my first year and second year, when we did a group assignment, we would just tell each other what we're doing, do it in our own documents, paste it in the one report, submit it. There was almost no double checking, right? But as I went through my degree, I realized that it's important to not only just put all the work together in the same document, but assign roles of who is going to be checking, double checking, and then approving the work. And nothing gets submitted until it gets approved. Now, is this level of review process necessary in every course? Not necessarily, but for the courses that matter to you the most, like your thesis courses, your capstones, yes, I would recommend it. Okay, next is don't be afraid to give each other feedback. And on the flip side of that coin, don't be stubborn when people give you that feedback. Try and be as receptive and open to it as possible. Okay, now for those of you who feel like you would be struggling to make a good contribution to your group, because maybe you were lacking the technical skills or you were lacking the time, here are some tips. Number one is the 80-20 rule. Now, I remember my first couple of years of uni, I used to get terrible marks, almost failing every course, right? And then I met a guy who told me that he's gotten a HD in every course he's ever done. And I was so amazed by that, because how could you balance so much work? And the tip that he gave me is something called the 80-20 rule. 80-20 rule says that the first 20% of effort that you put into an assignment is what gives you 80% of your marks. And the remaining 80% of the effort is only just going to perfect things, like it would be where you're fixing up commas, picking the right fonts, fixing your spelling. So invest that first 20% first, and then move on to the next assignment. And once you've done a decent chunk of work for each assignment, then come back and polish it. Okay, so 80% of your marks come from 20% of your effort. Put your time where it makes the greatest impact. Next is to embrace imposter syndrome, which is something that everyone feels throughout their degree. Don't shy away from a task just because you aren't 100% sure you can do it. You will learn along the way, and Rani will explain a little bit later how you can improve those technical skills. Okay, now sometimes people don't get things done on time and they try and hide it, or they don't do a good job, try and hide it. You have to be transparent. If things aren't going well, tell the group. If you aren't going to get something done on time, tell the group. Okay, now how do you distribute tasks fairly so that you don't end up with the fight? Number one, you should try and identify the strengths and weaknesses of the team. The way that I normally do this is with a simple table like this. We've got names, years, degrees, and skills. Now just keep in mind that most tasks in 1531 are similar to each other, so the strengths and weaknesses have less range. But as you progress through your degree, you'll find courses that require a more broad range of skills. And those are the courses where this kind of table becomes especially important. Okay, next is to remember that not all tasks require a high level of technical competence. Things like project management, sending out reminders, user interface design, brainstorming test cases, usability testing, writing documentation, report writing, and reviewing specifications all don't require you to be the best at coding, okay? So these are the kinds of things that you can do to pull your weight if you feel like your coding is lacking. Keep in mind that in COMP1531, documentation contribution is not a substitute for code contribution. But in the future courses, where it can be a substitution, this is where you would be pulling your weight. Okay, next is let people pick their tasks. When you hand out tasks, let people put their hands up for which ones they want to do. But what you'll find is that when you do that, people will put their hands up for the fun and easy tasks, and all of the boring ones get left behind. And what I see all too often is that the team leader feels responsible or obligated to fill out those remaining tasks with their name. It's not fair at all, right? You can tell here that Astrid only has one task, Oscar only has one task. So I should be asking Oscar and Astrid if they're willing to put their hands up. Okay, finally we have a verbal agreement of equity. Yuchao told me a funny example recently of a DESN 1000 group that was performing really poorly because one of their group members handed out the tasks without even asking people if they're happy with their tasks. So make sure you ask, is everyone happy with their tasks? Are you comfortable with this workload? Does that seem fair? And hopefully people say yes, and now you've leveraged accountability bias. Okay, the inevitable situation. What do you do if someone is slacking off? You first have to understand the root cause. It can come from multiple things. Number one is procrastination, which can come from, first of all, a lack of intrinsic motivation. Now, I saw this when I first started out in SunSwift. One of my team members, he was submitting things like late and not to a high standard. I could tell he was just starting his work in the 30 minutes before our meetings, and it just wasn't good enough. And we ended up having this private and candid conversation where he revealed to me that none of the tasks that I was giving him were really that fulfilling to him, right? It was all sketching, researching, 3D modeling, and he doesn't like any of that. And I think that kind of thing is so much fun. Turns out that what he likes is coding. So we ended up moving him to a different department. We moved him to embedded systems, and when we did, he completely transformed and he became one of the leaders of the team. So it just goes to show that the tasks that you give someone can really impact their motivation. So wherever it's possible, not necessarily in this course, but in some future courses, let people do what they want. So have a private, candid conversation with them and give them the tasks that they genuinely enjoy. Now, the next is a misunderstanding of deadline importance. So you know how I told you before that you should try and get work done a few days ahead of when it's actually due? Often people realize that it's not actually due on that day, it's due this day. And so they'll just put it off until it's actually due. But this is a really dangerous game to play. So you have to emphasize the consequences of missing the deadline. If we don't get this thing done by this day, then we can't start that. And if we can't start that, then we can't submit this. Okay? Emphasize the importance. Next is overwhelming task size. Sometimes you just look at a task and it looks like a mountain that you just don't want to have to climb. If that's the situation, break up those big tasks into smaller weeks and split them up across break up those big tasks into smaller tasks, split them up across each week, and check up on them each week. Okay, and this is a pretty inevitable one, personal issues. If that's the case, give their tasks to other team members and offer them support. And then probably the most common excuse that I get is, oh, I didn't get it done because I've got a heavy workload from other courses. Oh, I had to do this midterm, I had to prepare for this exam. I find that this excuse is very rarely valid if you have a verbal agreement of equity. If in the previous meeting someone said, oh yes, I can get it done on time, and I already know that I'm going to have a midterm exam, but I'm confident that I can get this work done, how can they use that excuse against you in the following meeting? Okay, next is how to make decisions as a group. So often you'll see decision making look like this. Someone will ask, which Kanban board should we use? And people vote. GitLab issues, GitLab issues, GitLab, 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 right? And then one person says Jira. Do we just go with the majority rules in this situation? What do you guys think?
Open discussion.
Empty background. Yes.
I have to let you guys answer before you child does.
Sorry.
Surely we just go with the majority.
Yeah, Adam said, yeah, have a chat.
Have a chat. Yeah, so it's not good enough to just go with the majority if the majority hasn't heard the opinion of the minority. So you should give this Jira person the opportunity to speak their mind, which would look like this. Which Kanban board should we use? I know everyone wants to use GitLab issues, but do you mind if I share why I think Jira is better? And most of the time, the rest of the team members will be kind enough to say yes. Okay, now sometimes you'll see a silly argument like this. Let's call the variable data, or no, let's call it data store. And these arguments, even though they seem trivial and ridiculous, sometimes they get blown out of proportion because this person in red has invested time into coding based on the variable data, and the person in green has invested time coding things based on the variable name data store. So there's this investment of time involved. If this is a situation and it's difficult to settle it, try and get a third party to settle it, or even your tutor. And wherever possible, try and make these decisions objectively. If it's a decision about the way a user interface should be designed, for example, remember that you are not the user, so try and find someone who is to give you that feedback. Okay, I want you guys to help me brainstorm what are the most common causes of arguments.
Your chat has been told to not give the answer away.
They haven't even heard my question yet.
Yeah. Common causes of arguments. Honestly, what food to eat.
Did someone say that?
No.
Oh, you made that up.
Deadlines. Ooh.
That one, yay.
Yeah, like
Deadlines are very fair.
not only the real deadline, but when your internal deadline is set. And what do you do if someone doesn't do things by the internal deadline? Yep.
Workload. Ooh, that's such a good one by Kevin.
Code style and implementation.
Oh,
Yeah,
so
defining like very specific rules about that. Yeah, good one. Okay, so there's a bit of lag in the chat for us, so I'm not going to wait too long. I'll run you through what are the most common answers that I normally get from students. Number one is strong conflicting opinions, typically about design decisions. Sometimes people aren't willing to listen to others, or on the flip side of that coin, people are not getting the chance to share their ideas. Different people have different rules for what behavior is considered acceptable. Workload is not being shared equally, not having clear rules about when to communicate, people not attending meetings or doing work on time. Now, normally a lot of these arguments take place in the middle of term, and they get aggressive, and they get heated, they get personal, right? And in the middle of the heat of the moment, people are trying to settle their differences, define rules, right? It's the wrong time to be having these difficult conversations. It's best to have it at the beginning of term before things start to get aggressive. And the way that we have these difficult conversations is through what we call a group contract. So I don't know if you guys have seen this before, but it has somewhere where everyone fills in their ZID and their name. Sometimes you would sign your signature. You would write when and where the meetings take place, how you'll record the meetings, how you'll communicate, what's a reasonable response time, how you'll handle conflicts, and so on, right? Some group contracts are very big, but we're keeping it nice and simple in this course. This is one of the things that is assessed in iteration 0, and we want you to use the template in the repo. Okay, so just look out for contract.md. Cool. Okay, how do you run a meeting that isn't a huge waste of time, like all of my meetings used to be? Let's look at the difference between a good meeting and a terrible meeting. A great meeting always runs on time, and a terrible meeting runs over time. And for whatever reason, I used to think that meetings that ran overtime were more productive because you're discussing more important things, getting more work done. But really, that's just disrespecting people's time. And I still remember being in second year, and me and my team used to take screenshots of our longest meeting, and one of them went for 16 hours. And we were proud of it at the time, but it was just so unproductive looking back at it. Okay, next is to make sure that every meeting has a clear agenda and goal, right? Terrible meetings are often aimless. Great meetings encourage contribution by each person, and terrible meetings are dominated by one person. In great meetings, everyone prepares for the meeting. They read the agenda, they get all their homework done, they do their research, they know what they want to say, they write down any questions that they want to discuss in the meeting minutes. But in terrible meetings, people enter the meeting unprepared. Great meetings stay on topic, terrible meetings go off topic. Okay? There's different types of meetings that you will encounter throughout your degree, so I'll run through them quickly now. We've got the first one, which is the kickoff meeting. Kickoff means the meeting that you have to kick off the term or kick off a project at the very beginning. It is where you set up a timeline, discuss roles, maybe fill out your group contract, and discuss the requirements of the project. We also have the weekly status update meetings, which is where everyone meets up once a week, discusses what they've done, where they've gotten stuck, how they can help each other out. Daily stand-ups, which Rani will talk about a little bit later. Decision-making meetings, of course, where everyone's just getting together, butting heads, trying to figure out what decision to make. Brainstorming meetings, design reviews, debrief meetings, which are the meetings that are the opposite of a kickoff meeting. You normally have a debrief meeting after a major assessment has been delivered, and you just reflect on what you did poorly, what you did well, and how you can improve next time. We've got team building meetings. which technically aren't really a formal meeting at all. They don't have an agenda. You just go out, have dinner, go out for a game of golf or whatever it is. We've got co-working sessions, which is normally the longer format of meeting where everyone's sitting in the same room, just getting work done. Now, in your meetings, you need to make sure that you are taking, I wouldn't force you to do this, but typically in most meetings, in most courses, it's a good idea to take meeting minutes. And meeting minutes are just a set of notes that you take during the meeting. We've provided a template to you in this course. Basically, you fill in the date and time, the week, who was there, and then you have an agenda. And in an agenda, you plan for what you want to discuss. Sometimes you'll have an extra column of who is responsible for discussing it and how much time is allocated to discussing it. You might create a list of homework to catch up with after the meeting. And probably most importantly is a list of questions that you want to bring up to your tutor in the next tutorial. Now, there's many different meeting minutes templates. This is a very simple one. But what you see here is the level of complexity that your marker expects. Now, a markdown meeting minutes template has been provided in the repo. Now, you don't have to use Markdown. You can use any tool that you wish to create your minutes, but you just need to submit it, okay? All right, I'm going to pass back over to Rainey now, who's going to discuss how what I've taught you will apply specifically to COMP1531.
Thank you, Oliver. Yay. Cool. So let's talk about some more specific and hopefully more software-related strategies for COMP1531. So let's talk a little bit more about how to make sure people get their work done on time, a little bit more on how to make sure tasks are done to a high standard, and a little bit more on how to be a better contributor. So how about for getting work done on time? In software projects, you might realize that sometimes stuff depends on other stuff, so you have some dependencies. You might realize that your team has some different definitions of what it means to get work complete or finished. You might realize that having like one meeting a week isn't enough. So how can you get a few more frequent check-ins? And also, while check-ins are good, how can you like sort of look at the project as a whole and be like, oh, this is where our progress is up to. This is what we need to focus on, right? So let's get into it. So first, planning for dependencies. Let's say iteration 1 spec just been released. You guys have a list of tasks. I've just jotted down the functions down here. So like clear, admin auth register, admin user details, etc. I have a question for you guys, and I will wait since this is an interesting one. Is there an order that you have to do these functions? What do you guys think? Is there an order or nah? So do you guys have to do these functions in particular order, or can you do it at any time? Can you do it in parallel? What's the vibe? I shall look towards the chat. Hello.
Can I answer?
Kevin. Can you Chao answer? Yeah.
I'll keep quiet. I'll be quiet.
Okay, so Adam says parallel is fine, I reckon. Ooh, okay. So Adam's been getting like 10 out of 10 right. So is he correct? Shall we see? Does anyone have any other opinions? Quewin, I don't know how to say your name, bro, but Quewin says no order specified. Yeah, okay. Okay, ooh, okay, and some like other opinions. Alright, let's see the answers. So, I see some yeses, I see some no's, and the answer is yes and no. Wow, isn't that crazy? Yeah, so you guys are mostly right. Because we use Git, i.e. our version control software, we can use branches. And working on branches means that you can work on parallel. Especially for 1531, we designed the project so there shouldn't be any single time where you're really like waiting or you have to wait for someone, right? However, you guys are right. Yeah, we have dependencies. So yes, some functions will rely on others to test. So I'll talk a little bit more specifically. So what do we mean by you guys can work in parallel? We mean that, we asked you to write black box tests. And since black box tests are just based on the spec, you don't need to wait for a group member to implement the work before you go and write the test, right? However, to actually run the test to validate if your code works, you will need to wait for your group member to maybe finish their work, merge it into master, and then you pull from master and then actually run your tests to see if your own code works, right? So knowing this, what I might do if I had a group in 1531 is draw a graph. I've just called it a dependencies graph here. So I think generally really quickly early on, people realize that clear is super important, right? Clear resets the data store. You can't really write tests if you're not resetting between tests, right? So clear is basically important for like every single test there is, which means that most important, we'll put that at the top of our dependencies graph. You might also realize, hey, wait a second, admin auth register is also really important, right? Because if you can't create a user, you can't create a quiz. And if you can't create a quiz, there's like a lot of other functions that don't work, right? So you might be like, oh, okay, yeah, admin auth register, gotta get that one done fast, right? Cool. And obviously I've just drawn a little dependencies graph there, but you guys hopefully will draw a little bit more of a thorough one. Can just be really rough to give you guys an idea, right? Something that may happen when you're just drawing a dependencies graph is you might notice a circular dependency. So what do I mean by this? Let's say I'm doing admin quiz list and I'm like, if I'd like to list more than like 0 quizzes, I'm gonna need quiz create in order to actually test my admin quiz list, right? So this means that quiz create needs to be done before admin quiz list. However, let's say my buddy, Oliver over there, is doing admin quiz create. He might be like, hey, I'm creating quizzes, but I also want to kind of check if the quiz name and description is set correctly. So I need admin quiz list in order to check admin quiz create. And now we have like a little circular dependency, right? We're like, oh, I need you, but you need me. What do we do here? It's not that complicated. Basically, me and Oliver would, or even as a group, if you're doing it as a group, would just chat and be like, oh, okay, we kind of have a circular dependency. The tests between these like circular dependencies are actually kind of similar. So why doesn't like admin quiz list write those tests and admin quiz create can just write some more simple tests, right? So the TLDR with circular dependencies is just talk to your teammate and break it up one way. So for example, my group might be like, okay, let's just get admin quiz create merged in, and the tests around checking like the valid name and stuff that can go into the admin quiz list tests. Another thing is like, hey, you can always go back and add more tests. So again, this actually isn't that big of an issue. Talk to your team, you'll work it out. All right, next is the definition of completion. So what does finished mean, right? What happens if your team has different definitions of completions? So let's say that I have, and my team have a deadline, and one of the team members goes away to do their work, and before their deadline, they've got their merge requests perfectly put up, they've like gone and fixed all the conflicts, their code is tested and reviewed, and they're just like one click away from merging, right? And on the other hand, let's say like, one of my teammates is like, oh yeah, I got my work done. I've got like a local function, it's written, it's untested, it's unreviewed, it's ready to rumble, and that's my definition of finish, right? What's gonna happen when we come back to the deadline? Well, obviously I'm gonna look at that person, I'm like, yo, bro, you didn't get your work done. And he's gonna be like, what do you mean? I got my work done. What are you on about, right? And there's going to be some resentment there because there's a implicit expectation of what finished meant, right? So in this case, you're going to get both people mad at each other because one person's like, yo, you lazy. And the other person's going to be like, yo, this person is like so high maintenance, right? So rather than have this like resentment happen up, just like chat with your team early on like what it means to get work done. This also goes for any other implicit assumptions you have, right? Some students might be really used to doing stuff last minute, right? Some students might be really used to doing things like very consistently. Make sure you chat to your team and get an understanding at least of where other people's opinions are so that when these things come up, you don't have hidden resentment build up. All right, next. How about frequent check-ins? So an iteration is approximately 2 weeks long. I know for certain iteration 1 is. Let's say that the Wednesday, you guys have one meeting a week. Let's say the Wednesday after the iteration is released, you have a meeting. And the Wednesday before the iteration is due, you have a meeting. Usually what happens here is that you're going to get one meeting, so the first meeting, where you guys allocate the tasks, right? And then you're going to get like a nice fog of war where you're not quite sure what's going on, but you're really praying that your teammates get their work done by the second meeting, right? Really hoping and praying, right? But what happens if they don't get their work done? You're like, oh, damn, we have only 3 days to reallocate our work and get that done, right? Which is kind of stressful, right? So what's the solution to this? Well, usually people are like, oh, I want more meetings. But meetings are kind of long. They're usually like 30 minutes to an hour, I find. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't really want to see my team every day. Like, fair enough, if you want to see your team every day, that's, yep, all good for you. But I don't really want to see my team every day, right? So what else can we do? Well, we have this thing called stand-ups. So what are stand-ups? They're frequent, often daily, short progress updates. They basically, each member of the team answers 3 key questions. What did I do? What problems did I face? Also known as blockers. And what am I going to do next before the next stand-up? So these can be synchronous or async. So synchronous stand-ups are more traditional stand-ups. They're in real time. For example, you would stand up, in person. There are also asynchronous stand-ups that aren't real time. So for example, they might be via email or via MS Teams. Here's an example of an asynchronous stand-up. So clearly one poor member of the team is tasked with sending the reminder for the stand-up. So they're like, hey everyone, leave a quick comment. You can notice that this member of the team has also talked a little bit about their blockers. So they're saying, hey, I'm trying to get this function done, but actually I can't get this function done until this other person, Alvin, has finished admin quiz create. They also talk a little bit about the struggles and mention that they have other coursework coming up soon. So your teammate should be like, oh, maybe this person is going to be able to help out in the next few days because they have some other work. Next, we have Alvin. So done a great job of transparency here, being like, hey, actually, I've been really busy and I haven't been able to get the work done, which is really good, and we appreciate the transparency. And he said, hey, I'm going to try finish admin quiz create today if possible and get it out for review. I also really like how Alvin's asked for help. So he's like, hey, I can't figure out how to do this part. Hey, if you have some time, would you like to pair and help me? Which is awesome. Now, I want to add a disclaimer here that good teammates will go and help if they can. However, it's not on teammates to teach another member the entire course. So, hey, if you know the reason why an error might be appearing, or you have some spare time you're happy to spend helping out, that's great, and good team members hopefully will do that. However, if you feel like someone just doesn't really get it, don't feel obliged to carry them or something, right? Redirect them to course resources, point them out to the forum, help session, help them a little bit, send them to the right lectures and stuff, right? But don't feel obliged to teach them the entire course. That's not your responsibility. All right, cool. Moving on to next. How about understanding progress? Well, around understanding progress, we talk about task board. What is a task board? A task board is a project management tool that keeps track of tasks. So you might have some description, some status, and some assignees. Usually it helps you determine the progress of your project at a glance. So you can see in the below task board, the text is kind of small, but hopefully you can see. You have a testing column, an implementing column, a reviewing column, as well as open and closed issues. And you can see ooh, I don't know, man, that clear in open, maybe we should focus right that, right? So it's a really quick way to look at your project at a glance. There are also some simpler formats. So for example, just having a to do, doing, and a done column is also completely fine. You can see that this group has added a few more tags, like documentation, ready review stuff to their issues board. For your group, you don't need to do this level of detail, right? As long as you have some sort of issue, if you have some deadlines and you have some assignees and some general workflow, you'll be okay. Find something that works simply enough for your group. This isn't something you should just be spending that much time on. So, cool. All right, next, quick recap. So, plan for dependencies graph. Definitional completion, make sure you guys talk about those implicit assumptions, frequent check-ins, make sure you guys use stand-ups or some other strategies to make sure you're aware of what's happening in that fog time. Understanding progress, issues, or task board. All right. Now, let's go to talk about how do you make sure tasks are done to a high standard. So, let's talk about code review, pair programming, and maybe setting some more specific Git standards. So, what is a code review? A code review is a quality assurance process that usually involves another member of the team or a domain expert looking over code. Sometimes if the code crosses multiple domains, multiple domain experts will have a look at it. For the, usually in 1531, we don't go into that deep. Obviously, I hope there are no domain experts taking the course, but in the industry, this is what would happen. So there are a few different types of code review. There's some synchronous or async types, and the benefits are varied. You can share knowledge, you can discover bugs earlier, maintain standards, improve code quality. I especially want to highlight the share knowledge one for 1531. So since you guys are all students, hopefully your team is able to share knowledge with each other to raise everyone up. Something that we see kind of happen is sometimes there's like a god programmer in the team, right? They know everything. Everyone goes to them for help, right? But what can kind of happen is like all of the team is like leaning on this one person. So what happens if that one person gets sick or has to go away or has something happen, right? It would be nice if through code review or other methods, that person can sort of share their knowledge and raise the overall skill level of the entire team so that that person can, get sick and feel okay about that. And everyone else is, feels comfortable doing the work as well. I will note that my friends have asked me to say that by not teaching other people, you maintain your job security. I hope that no one takes this point seriously because you guys are university students, so sharing knowledge is good. All right, so no single point of failure. All right, in the right, we have some example of how you might do this asynchronously. We have a merge request. In the changes tab, you'll see all the changes that your friend has made and you can add some comments. So shall we do some real life code review? I have written this fantastic, amazing sum even numbers function. And now I've made a merge request into your group repos. And I've asked you guys for comments, right? So I'm asking you guys for a code review. So what would you guys comment on my code if I tried to merge that into your master branch? Yeah, hopefully the answer is like perfect, amazing, fantastic. But, if it's not, we'll see, I guess. All right, so let's wiggle over. I'm waiting for Adam to point out all my problems. Oh, yes! Who is that? Ramid. Yes, Ramid, you are my friend. Looks good to me. Ship it. Oh, Kevin, looks good to me as well. Amazing. I love that. Damn, all my supporters. Kevin says use reducer. What does the reducer mean? Yeah, so I'll give you guys a hint. There's a problem on almost every single line in this piece of code. So see if you guys can find it. I know we can be use reducer, right? But use reducer isn't going to help your teammate learn. They're going to be like, yo, what the heck is a reducer? And then you're going to have to explain it, right? So maybe you can talk about a bit more of an intermediate step. All right. I feel like you guys type really slowly. So shall I move on? Yes, I shall. Okay. So I've given this to my friend who works in industry to read, and he's gone and roasted the heck out of me. So he's like, why isn't there a comment? If you're writing like a helper function, you need a comment. So he said, hey, add some JS docs. He's being like, yo, why are you using var? Why not just use let? So if you guys don't know, var basically makes that thing a global variable. So that's why we just basically don't even talk about var in 1531 because you kind of want to avoid it. He's also said, hey, I noticed that you're using a for index loop. A next step up from that might be to use a for of loop. And then the next step even up above that is what Kevin mentioned in terms of using a reducer, right? So gotten some good feedback from my friend and now my JavaScript ability has improved. Yay. Okay, cool. Let's talk about the next thing. So how about pair programming? So pair programming generally involves two developers having one monitor and one keyboard working together. This also fosters knowledge sharing. It's a real-time code review, as well as increasing collaboration in your group. So what does that look like? So there's lots of different types of pair programming. There could be unstructured, driver navigator, and ping pong pair programming. In your group, just do the pair programming that works for you guys. Generally, I find it useful if there's a more experienced or a less experienced pair programmer, that the more experienced one might do an example and be like, hey, do you want to try? And then sort of help them out, right? If they're two people with sort of equal skills, then they can sort of swap back and forth. One person might get tired of coding and so on and so forth. Do be careful in COMP1531. If you do pair programming, make sure that eventually the other person commits, because we look at commits. If you're all committing on one laptop, it's going to look like that one person has done all the work, right? So if you're pair programming, make sure you switch to another laptop eventually, so the commits can be from the right person. If you realize you made the mistake, yeah, it's no biggie. Just let your tutor know and they'll figure it out, right? All right, next. I know that Oliver already mentioned reading the marking criteria. I wanted to suggest some ways that you could do that better in COMP1531. In particular, commits. So for example, commits or like all Git practices are marked individually. So you to yourself, or maybe as a group you have the discussion, hey, I want my commits to follow some sort of format. So the format might be like the type of commit and then some message. So test or feature, added login tests, right? You now also have some sort of branch structure, so it's easy to know where things are in your group, where you might be like, hey, iter1, and then the function name, right? Cool. I will also say that before we move on, that it would be sometimes good to have this discussion with your tutor, because remember, your tutor is the one that's going to be marking your work at the end, right? So the more you can do to make your tutor's life easy, the more they will like you, and hopefully the more marks they will give you. So you should talk to them about it, make their life easy, and they will be happy. And if they're happy, you know. Anyway, moving on. Cool. Finally, let's talk about how to be a better contributor. In particular, how you can be a better technical contributor in 1531. So I think the most important thing here is to, take it step by step. So firstly, you might be like, what am I finding hard? If you're unable to understand what you're finding hard, then it's very difficult to make what you find hard easy, right? So try thinking about, what am I struggling with and how you can solve that. When you've found something that you're struggling with, try and break it down into small pieces. The more small pieces, the better. So any problem can be solved when broken down and attacked one small piece at a time. I think that's a famous quote for someone. Not sure. Next is, when you've broken it down, try and understand how things fit back together. A really common topic for understanding how concepts fit together is API servers, because now you have the function, now you have the server, and now you have your HTTP tests, which might use some other code to make things work better, right? So in this case, you can see that, hey, this like a big topic of API servers can be broken down into a lot of small pieces. You can understand the small pieces individually and then try to understand how these things fit together. And by understanding that, you'll have a really good understanding of how your program flows backwards and forwards. And once you've had that understanding, it's a lot easier to debug and understand where errors are coming from. A really good piece of advice that my friend gave me is that when you're running into these problems, first make sure you try yourself, and then make sure you ask for help. So something I've seen is like a student will stay stuck for 3 hours on the same problem. Like I'll watch them in the lab and they're still stuck, and I want to say something, but I'm like, oh, let them do their best, right? But then they continue getting stuck, and the next week in the next lab they're still stuck, right? So when you're hard stuck, for example, if you're hard stuck, if you're hard stuck, don't continue bashing your head against the wall. Make sure you go and ask for help, whether that's on the forum, whether that's a help session, whether that's your tutor. Your tutors are literally paid to help. They're probably standing behind you being like, oh damn, I really want to help this student, right? So make sure to actually ask them and get them involved. Since it's a group project, another great point is reading others' code. A lot of the functions in the project are kind of similar to other functions, so if someone's already kind of done it very well, you can try read their code and learn from them. Of course, you can also learn from others in pair programming, for example. A final point that I really struggle with is that practice makes better, and perfect is an illusion. I have very perfectionistic tendencies, so it means that sometimes when I want to do something, I'll think about all the things I want to do, and then suddenly that thing becomes very overwhelming, and I can't get the first step, right? So remember that doing 1 second of something is better than doing no seconds of something, and not to focus on perfect, but to focus on getting that first step one at a time. A final note I want to say in general about technical skills is that technical skills take time to develop. You're not going to get better at technical skills overnight. So during this process, please make sure that you're being compassionate and kind to yourself as well. All right, cool. So we've talked a lot, me and Oliver, about strategies to make sure things go better. But what happens when things, and somewhat inevitably, go wrong? Well, what happens if there's an internal group issue? So, for example, in equal contribution, someone is merging bad code into your master branch, or the teammate is just straight up rude to another teammate. Well, you should communicate the issue clearly and politely with your group members, and then, very importantly, work together to solve it. For example, I might say, hey, Yu Chao, I feel like I've been pulling a lot of the weight in the lectures this term. And Yu Chao will be like, oh, interesting. What can we do to solve it? And as a result, maybe I take less lectures, Yu Chao takes more lectures. Obviously, it's a very silly example. Please don't fire me, Yu Chao. But the idea is that you explain the problem And then rather than it's like you against them, come together and try to think of some ideas. Of course, if your group members' responses aren't very constructive, make sure you contact your tutor privately about it so that they're aware of the issue. All right, next very common problem. I think someone mentioned it in the chat before. What happens if your group member just disappears suddenly? Well, message them on MS Teams asking them for their whereabouts. But if they don't reply within like 48 to 72 hours, just continue as if they won't reappear. If they do reappear and have lost the opportunity to work, that's on them, not you. And also try to avoid putting yourself in life or death situations where waiting for a reply within 48 hours is the end all or be all. Obviously, this is implicit that you should have empathy and compassion. Sometimes things do happen, but in those cases, those group members can go get special cons and chat to the tutor, and your tutors will always be making sure to review your contribution and make sure everyone gets treated fairly, all right? But you don't want to put like the entire project on hold just because one member is not replying, right? A common theme between these two things is that generally, as long as you're communicating clearly with your team and your tutor, we'll be working out what's fair and making sure that everyone has the best outcome. So make sure you do that. And a note on this is that your tutors will be checking for your contribution via the peer evaluation, some scripts, as well as the Git history. Remember, Git records everything you do. So if someone has not been contributing very well, it's basically impossible to hide it. All right, I will now pass to Yu Chao to talk a little bit more about what peer evaluation goes on about. I know there's been a few questions on it. Yu Chao. You can have my chair.
Oh, thanks. Hey, hello. Yeah, I'm jump in for 2 minutes. So from iteration 1, we are going to evaluate your teamwork because teamwork is one of the major learning outcomes from COMP1531. And you are going to do a peer review for each other's work, for each other's teamwork or teamwork contribution. And there are 4 dimensions that we are going to ask you to evaluate for your peers, including participation, dependability, team well-being, and work contribution. So what they are. So for participation means that what was the level of participation in group work, like whether they attended to the meetings, making suggestions, taking responsibility for tasks, and like is in communication with their peers. So how well they participate in the teamwork. And for dependability, it means like how dependable was this team member. So whether they can deliver their work on time, and with the expected level of quality. So this is the second dimension that we are going to evaluate. And for the team well-being, it means how much did this team member contribute to the healthy function of the team by like communicating properly with the members, listening to concerns, facilitating discussions, and also offering suggestions or feedback to your team member, to your peers. And what contribution is how much did you contribute to the project? And we'll have very clear description of the 4 dimensions in the spec from iteration 1. So when we release iteration 1, you can see very clear description of the 4 dimensions. And after the iteration 1 or 2 or 3 is due, we'll send you a link to do this peer evaluation. So it's called teamwork evaluation. So we evaluate the teamwork. Okay, and this is important, like not only as evaluation and feedback for you, but it's also it will affect your work, your mark for that iteration. So if you get very good teamwork evaluation, you may be scaled up and vice versa. But this the scaling will also be reviewed by your tutor, so we will not be solely relying on the teamwork evaluation, but your tutor will also review the quality or quantity of your contribution to approve the scaling. Yeah, that's it from me. I'll hand it back to Rennie, and if you have any questions, just post in the chat.
All right. Cool. Thank you, Yu Chao. Hopefully that was clear. Any questions, please put them in the chat or in the forum. So, next slide. So me and Oliver have mentioned quite a few strategies. We've mentioned lots of interesting different things. Do you need to do everything we've mentioned? Answers in the chat. I'm hoping that this one is an easy one for you guys.
Sorry, what was the question?
Do students need to do everything that we've mentioned so far? Yu Chao's too good of a student. Knows the answer immediately. Hopefully you guys can hear Yu Chao leaking. No, says Kevin. Damn. Kevin also getting 10 out of 10 correct answers. Yeah, you're exactly right. Hell no. So, the 1531 marking criteria is quite flexible. The marking criteria will expect a minimum standard of meeting notes / minutes, issues board / task board, and stand-ups. However, everything around that is left up to your group. So this means that your group should pick additional or impose additional standards depending on their situation and pick relevant strategies for your group. So for example, if your group is really going for HDs, right, you might have more standards around code or around style or around Git or about using the task board, right? However, if your group, I don't know, maybe a few members are less clear, maybe you have more strategies in terms of adding code review to make sure all the code that gets merged in is really good, right? So again, because the marking criteria is flexible, it's up to you guys. Just pick the strategies that work and fix up the problems in your group. Cool. So thanks everyone for listening to our presentation. We would like to ask you guys for if you have any questions. And while you guys are doing that, since we know there was a bit of a delay, we have some questions from the form we sent out a week ago to finish. The first question is, how do you communicate well in a second language? Oliver, do you have any opinions about how students might be able to communicate well in a second language?
Really good question. I've actually taught a whole bunch of courses where some of the students are international students. I'm teaching at UNSW College as well. One of the biggest tips that I can give to you is if you do struggle in communicating in English, and especially verbally, because it maybe takes you longer to form the sentences and think of exactly what it is that you're trying to say, what you can do is try and tell your team that there is something that you want to say and to give you some time to think of the words to say it. Or you can think of a way you can communicate it by maybe writing up a message and perfecting exactly what it is you want to say. But you also need to remember that communication is a two-way street. So while if you do struggle with English, and you do have to try and make an extra effort for everyone to understand you, the rest of your team should be as empathetic as possible and be as patient as possible to take the time to understand you. Yeah, back to you.
Cool. I would like to note as well that UNSW does have an official policy that the main language that students should be working in is English. But aside from that, do try to be supportive and inclusive as you can. And for those unconfident speakers, I feel like as long as you show the effort, your group will understand. Cool. So next question. What about if I'm communicating with teammates who have a bit of an age gap with me or a bit of a knowledge gap? What to do? Yeah, so I think kind of similar to the second language one. Try and, in general, treat people politely and also try to understand what they want. So for example, for older students, they might have work, right? Which means they're not really available until after 5. Also, because of work and other things, older students might have less flexible schedules. If you're a student that often gets stuff done last minute, make sure that you're aware of this, that if you're getting things done last minute, they might not be able to help you and what the consequences of that will be, right? In general, again, as long as you're communicating really clearly, you'll be okay. Knowledge gap is a bit interesting, I guess. For if you're already really familiar with JavaScript and really good at the language, then I would say learning the language isn't the hard part of this course for you. I would say that you have an opportunity and time to maybe try to develop your interpersonal skills or your teaching skills, right? So if you can, try to help out your teammates and show them what they can do better, little by little, step by step. you can try and like, I don't know, get in for a tutor position next term if that's what you really want to, right? Again, TLDR, if everyone is open and honest in their communication, I'm sure you're able to like work out some sort of process that works for an entire group. Cool. All right, last question. So, how about reconciling different individual goals? For example, if one of your team members wants to go for a HD, another team member wants to go for a pass. Yeah, so this one is, again, quite difficult one than a Tim. I will say for 1531 specifically, do make sure your tutor knows that your group has discussed and kind of come to realize that people have different individual goals. Your tutor will be able to move you guys around, assuming that the opportunity arises. In the meantime, perhaps some discussion can occur in your group where you decide, hey, someone who's going for a pass, maybe they're happy to just take like 2 functions for the duration, whereas the person doing the HD is happy to take more. And as long as this is a very clearly communicated expectation of different workloads within the group and to your tutor, you guys will be fine with that. The reason that we are worried about equal contribution for some other reasons is that beforehand there's been issues where a student has just taken over like the entire project, and that is not okay. Right? They've taken over the entire project without asking their group members. That's not okay. But if you talk to your group members, you realize, hey, we have different things that we want. Let's find a way to make sure everyone gets what they want. That's completely okay. Cool. Let's see if there's any questions pop up in chat or on the form in the meantime. I don't think so. No, well, I don't think so. If you guys do have questions, pop them in. Otherwise, I don't know. What are some other common questions that students have? Any thoughts?
I think we've covered it all.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've covered it all. Damn, good job, us. Doing great. Yeah, awesome. Well, in that case, thanks everyone for listening to our presentation. We hope it was very useful for you guys.
And I just noticed that the online, like the live streaming, cannot capture the drawing properly.
Oh no.
So can we move this a little bit?
Yeah.
And
Ooh.
can you see from over there?
Oh no, we'll have to wait.
This is a very lovely drawing by our Oliver. Our talented Oliver. Can you see that?
Yes.
Maybe.
We'll find out soon.
Yeah. Okay. Otherwise, thank you so much. Bye bye.
Alright, see everyone. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Alright.
I will stop the streaming from